I have an unpopular opinion about Uzumaki, and it's that I don't think it was that bad. I think actually, for the most part, it was pretty good. Hear me out, okay? Hear me out. I watched the anime first, and then I read the graphic novel, and then I watched it again, and it actually improved. I think it's actually a good adaptation. So when I first watched it, I was just like, this is not that bad. Like, the people dogpiling on it are being excessive. It's really not that bad. Well, hold on. There's an asterisk there because I think episodes 1, 3, and 4 are good adaptations. What everyone is saying about episode 2, hey, leave me out of that conversation. You guys got it. leave me out of that conversation about episode 2. I'm defending episodes 1, 3, and 4. Episode 2, I'm gonna stand over here and pretend episode 2 is not a part of it. I will talk about episode 2 a little bit, but what everyone is saying about it being bad, the simple answer is yes. To discuss Uzumaki, we first have to discuss the conversation around it. And I already sound tired, because I am. It's a weird thing, right? Especially to say in the season of Blue Lock Season 2 that's airing. People will take 5 seconds of bad animation and then just completely ignore that the rest of the episode is animated extremely well. That's such a weird thing about Uzumaki. Like, people really want to go viral for the bad animation and the bad animation quality. And yes, episode 2 is a gold mine of content for those types of channels. More of it is animated badly than it's not. But when episode 4 finished, I saw people clipping that scene of like Shuichi being grabbed and falling. And that's like literally 3 seconds of a 1 hour episode. The episode is over 1 hour. I think it's like 1 hour, 15 minutes or something. And it's insane to me because the episode is so long. Be like, oh man, this is what we waited 5 years for. Yeah, how about you clip any other part of that episode? People that say, I waited 5 years for this are just ignoring that the pandemic happened. Because that took 2 years out of production time. They have said it. It took 2 years out of production time because it was a global production. So of course, when the globe closes down, you cannot continue a global production. I don't even think it's that much of a stretch to assume that with Uzumaki being put on a shelf, the time that they were going to use for Uzumaki, they no longer had that time because they had to pick up other projects with deadlines. I would think that Adult Swim would have had to like slot in time to work on Uzumaki between other things. With the way that the animation industry works over there, I don't think they could have had Production IG's full attention again. I think they had it, but then the pandemic hit and they no longer had it. But even so, at most, they've been working on Uzumaki for 3 years. I think 3 years is generous, to be honest. And then Production IG went on to do Heavenly Delusion, and I think they're doing Heavenly Delusion Season 2. I think they did other stuff, but Heavenly Delusion is a big one that I know of. The animation in episode 4 almost reaches the quality of episode 1, animation-wise. Episode 4 has some of the most disturbing content I've ever seen in my life, like with the snail people. And it's not because I've seen some disturbing things. I'm not like, oh man, this is my first time. But at the same time, episode 4 shoots itself in the foot because those tornado people are just way too goofy for a horror manga. But at the same time, I keep saying but at the same time, those tornado people are in the graphic novel. I read the whole thing and they're in it. And it's just as goofy as the anime. What was Junji Ito cooking? Like, seriously, what was he cooking? Because when I read it in the graphic novel, it killed the tension just as much as it did in the anime. I thought the anime did make them up because I was like, there's no way, because this is too ridiculous. It has to be an animation problem. Maybe they looked better in the graphic novel. Maybe it's just like a toonami thing. They just ran out of budget or something and they made them look really, really goofy. No, come to find out, no, actually, the graphic novel has them posing in the tornadoes. It's like they're Titans from Attack on Titan, you know, making goofy poses, except it's not scary. Some of it is really disturbing and horror and scary. And then for some reason, you have the tornado people. Why? When you're creating that kind of atmosphere and when you've maintained that kind of atmosphere for all those chapters just to kill it for a gag, I don't know how any adaptation would adapt that without killing the tension of everything going forward and everything that happened before it. I don't think there was any winning when adapting that part of Uzumaki, because if you ignore the tornado people, then people are like, oh, this is not accurate, you're leaving X, Y, and Z out. But adapting the tornado people actively hurt the series. It's goofy and tension killing in the graphic novel, and it's goofy and tension killing in the anime. Honestly, the Tornado People dropped Uzumaki down to a 7 for me, but then I was like, oh, this is in the graphic novel, so it raised it back up to a 7.5. I'll give you 0.5, because the Tornado People still ruin it, but I don't think they could have won in that situation. But back to the wider conversation about Uzumaki. Don't bring up my name when you're talking about episode 2, alright? I don't want to be involved in that conversation. But episode 3 is a very big improvement on episode 2. It's not to the quality of episode 1, but to say that it's a bad adaptation, there are problems with the adaptation, but to say that it's like badly animated, it's not, especially in the style that they went with. People say this when the Junji Ito collection exists. We have seen what a badly adapted adaptation of Junji Ito's work looks like. And compared to that, Uzumaki is good. It's not the best thing since sliced bread, but it is good. It's at least a 7.5 out of 10. Junji Ito does this thing, at least in Uzumaki, because I haven't read the other graphic novels. He's really good at build-up. He'll make a character do something small and seemingly not that bad, and then build it up and up and up until it's like a spiral collection that you spend hours staring at and get lost in and ignore your family completely, to the point that if they destroy that collection, you turn yourself into a spiral and die. And the first episode really captures that well. Atmosphere. The second episode, I think what they chose to adapt was really their downfall. Episode 2 adapts the hair chapter, the spiral hair chapter, and the Jack in the Box chapter, and the snail chapter, and the lovers chapter. It also adapts the lighthouse chapter. I think that the hair chapter is probably the most skippable chapter in all of Uzumaki. The only thing that you would miss by skipping that chapter is how she got short hair. It was creepy when people were being mesmerized by her hair, but then it turned into this jealousy hair competition thing, and it just wasn't scary to me anymore. It's just like, oh, this is happening now. Okay. And I really think that of all chapters, that's the one that should have been left on the cutting room floor. I just have no idea why, of all the chapters, they decided that one needs the full adaptation treatment, because it doesn't. The only thing I will say that they absolutely kind of butchered was the Jack in the Box chapter. You know that spring boy that seemed absolutely random at the end of episode 3, and I give -1 point to my overall score just for him? Just for him, and he's on the screen for like 5 seconds, because he absolutely killed the tension. And there was tension. If that episode ended without him appearing, it would have been a much better episode. But he appears, murders the tension, takes it out back, and shoots it in the face. And then the episode ends, and you're left with that. So in episode 2, I would have adapted the snail chapter and the Jack in the Box chapter, because both of those involve her classmates, so you can literally do both at the same time. Just have the Jack in the Box guy be a part of the school situation with the snail. And then I would probably cut out the lovers chapter. The only thing that you get from that, in my opinion, the only thing you get from that is learning about the row houses and learning that there's a curse put on the row houses. Topical, kind of, not really. By the time this video comes out, it's probably not gonna be topical anymore. But like the Pokemon leaks, like those stories, that's what it felt like to me. Like the Little Mermaid, like the original story of the Little Mermaid where she turns into sea foam. Them twisting together wasn't really scary to me. It wasn't even all that disturbing. It's like just something mystical that happens and then the story's over. That's why I don't know. They decided to adapt the 2 worst chapters, in my opinion, like back to back in the same episode. The Jack in the Box story is actually good. It's just like, ah man, we forgot to adapt the Jack in the Box story. So just toss Spring Boy in there. You should have just left him out. That's the only baffling decision. The story that got me the most, that was the most disturbing for me in the graphic novel, that wasn't in the anime, it kind of was in the anime. They adapted the very end of it, which they didn't adapt any of the setup for the pottery story. There's a pottery chapter. Kirie's dad, he makes pottery and stuff, but that pottery is spiraled. It's cursed. He becomes like cursed by the spiral curse, and he starts making weird pottery. And at first it's like, dear, what are you doing? And then he starts making pottery with like faces of the people that died on it. And then the pottery gets increasingly more grotesque and disgusting. And his family is like, dear, that's disturbing, dear, that's horrifying. And then he starts sitting in the kiln for hours, or sitting in the kiln room, like, you know, making pottery. And Kyrie starts being tormented by it because she went down to see like what was going on, what was so fascinating about this kiln and the pottery in it. She starts hearing the dead, but they're in the kiln and it's like they're being burned alive, like they've become part of his pottery. They start screaming, and they do scream in the anime, but they cut out the actual disturbing lines. Like they were talking about how hot the fire is, and it wasn't just about Shuichi, like it was multiple people. It was everyone that had died up to that point that got captured in his pottery or something. And it's an actual disturbing story, but I can't even say they didn't adapt it. They just adapted the end of it. They adapted like the last 4 pages of it. So I can't say it's not adapted. I just can say that it doesn't have the impact it should have. I like that in episode 3 they went back and finished up the story with Shuichi's mom and the scissors and stuff. Let me just say that Kyrie as a protagonist, I had a lot of issues with her, but she's like that in the graphic novel. She's an airhead. All of these disturbing things keep happening to her, and she keeps being like, what? How could this happen? What? It's the exact same way in the graphic novel. It's not gonna get better if you read it. Kyrie is easily the worst part of the adaptions. Honestly, every single character around her is much more interesting than she is. It's because she's just so clueless. Shuichi's like, girl, snap out of it. And she's like, what? What's happening? What? Where? Who? It's just like, you just gotta get used to it. It was just, I thought it was an anime thing, but no, it's not. You know, the lights are on in her head, but no one's home. The lights are on, but no one's home. I guess that's also why it made my second watch of Uzumaki better, because this wasn't just something that the anime made up. Kyrie is just like that. If there's anyone to blame, you would literally have to blame the author for creating her that way. It's no longer on the blame of the production or the anime team or anyone involved in what I'm watching. So I was like, oh, okay. The only thing that I really say that they should have included is the lore about the dragonfly pond. Even from the chapter where Shuichi's dad died, which is very early on, the dragonfly pond was like sucking their essence. I don't know, it was sucking like the black smoke clouds, like the swirly black smoke clouds into the lake surface. And I think that really helps when they go to it in episode 4. Episode 3 is also the mosquito chapter. And while the graphic novel had more content relating to the mushrooms, the baby that came out of Kyrie's cousin, I think, that baby, he was out for longer. All the babies were out for longer and more actually happened. But I don't think the episode needed that content, if that makes sense. The outcome is the same. Kyrie leaves the hospital, nothing is resolved. We don't know what happened with the baby that was put back inside of her cousin. We don't know what happened to the hospital. We don't know what happened to the mushrooms, which in the graphic novel, people were like mesmerized by them and eating them. It's just something that happens, and then Kyrie moves on and never mentions it again. If you treat Uzumaki like a series of folktales, I think it's much better, because when I was watching it, I was actually expecting things to connect and end. I'm not expecting an overarching cohesive story, but if something happens in the story, I would like for there to be a reason. I don't know, maybe that's wild. Maybe that's such a wild thing to want. And a lot of the graphic novel just wasn't as disturbing to me as the anime. It's a weird thing because seeing them actually turning into snails on the screen was much more disturbing to me than just like going to the next page and they're in the process of turning into snails, but it's not like the motion. The noises they make as they're turning into snails, I really didn't like that. Like when the pregnant lady is in bed with her belly stitched up, the noises her belly made is what made that scene for me. So just reading it in black and white without any sound just didn't do it for me. And also, I think Junji Ito's work is generally unadaptable. At this point in his career, I think he's too famous because he's known as the horror manga guy. A lot of the chapters in Uzumaki were not horror. They were just kind of creepy / disturbing / comedy sometimes. But there are very few chapters that I would say were or are outright horror. Even the typhoon chapter, it was more like a mystery than anything to me because it's like, why does this typhoon want Kyrie? The answer is, I don't even think the author knows the answer to that question. I don't know, it's just a cool thing that I threw in there. I don't know. Kiria is even more of an airhead in the graphic novel because she decides in this storm, hey, I need to go give Shuichi some food right now. And it's like, okay, that's how she gets trapped outside. And he finds her and he's like, what are you doing? Why are you out here? And she's like, oh, but I wanted to give you some food. I'm telling you, she's such an airhead. You just have to accept it or you're just not gonna like her the entire time you're reading. Because she's an airhead in every chapter except the last one. And then, speaking of the last chapter / episode, the way that Shuichi falls with the thing wrapped around him, the thing that's been memed on and that's probably going to be memed on until the end of time, that's how he falls in the graphic novel. It's like a shot of Shuichi being grabbed and then another shot of him being like halfway down the pit with the arms wrapped around him, and it looks exactly like that. So I'm not sure how they could have adapted it differently. This is a thing where you have to have the wider conversation because they adapted it perfectly. Actually, they adapted that too perfectly in my opinion. If they had changed it, it would not have looked as goofy. I thought it looked different in the graphic novel, and then I got to that part and I was like, oh, they literally adapted it. That's why it's a 7.5 out of 10 for me, because I can't blame the adaptation for adapting things that were in the graphic novel. The math is not going to add up correctly, but it's a 7.5. Oh, speaking of, I got distracted. I got so distracted. Speaking of the typhoon chapter, I thought it was pretty weird how Shuichi was like, oh, the typhoon is in love with you. That's why it's after you. But in the graphic novel, he says the exact same thing. When he sees this giant typhoon after her, when he realizes it, because she doesn't realize it because she's an airhead, he realizes it and he has to explain everything to her. I think the exact line in English is, looks like I have some competition. And it's like, misplaced comedy, my friends. Oh man, this typhoon might destroy the town, it might destroy all my loved ones. Looks like I have some competition from this destructive storm. It's like, okay, I guess if you're not gonna take this seriously, I won't either. There's just these random comedic elements for no reason. It's not disturbing, it's tension killing. I think what the anime does really well, 1, 3, and 4. What the anime does really well is atmosphere. Like the entire time you can feel something is up with this town, and then the atmosphere and tension just raise and get higher and higher and higher as things start to happen. And episode 1 really excels at that. And I think episode 3 also excels at that for the story they tell. There's probably no tension at all if you already know what's gonna happen. But me, first time viewer, when I watched it, there was tension because I didn't know what was going on in this hospital. And she finds a dead person, and then Shuichi's mom is seeing spirals and seeing Shuichi's father again. And then it's like, what's going to happen? There was so much tension and so much buildup that I was waiting for something to happen. And then something did happen. Those disturbing ass babies. It wasn't that they talked that was so disturbing to me, but what they talked about. They were talking about, oh man, I wish I could be put back in. And I was like, oh, I've had enough of these babies. I've seen them for 0.5 seconds and I've had enough of these babies. And then when you go back to the room and the doctor's there, and then you see the stitches on her stomach, and then she gets up and her tongue, the animation on her tongue, that animation, that specific animation, and the mushroom bursting out of the baby's stomach, it actually made me go like, you know what? I don't think I need to read Junji Ito's work. If it's more of this, I'm good. I am sincerely good. I've had enough, actually. But then I really wanted to make this video, and I was like, I can't. I have to read the graphic novel so I can be informed. The anime does an anime original ending, which makes it sort of more disturbing. The original ending is more like a horror ending, where everything is doomed and everything is bad. But the anime original ending is more suspense, because it's like the cycle repeats. But that's really all I wanted to talk about Uzumaki. I just wanted to insert my thoughts, probably many months late. See you guys later. Episode 1 is plus 4 points, because that was a really good episode. Episode 2 is minus 2 points. Episode 3 is plus 2 points. Episode 4 is plus 2 points. But then you have to... I can't do math. Hold on.